we're going to pick up with Parmenides today. We talked about Heraclitus, the Greek who believed the underlying substance of all things is fire. So now we have Thales with water, Anaximenes with air, Heraclitus with fire. You kind of see where we're going with this, with the ancient Greek elements. The next guy, however, who was Heraclitus' disciple, his name is Parmenides. And Parmenides really switched things up. He said, not only can you not step in the same river twice, you cannot step in the same river once, because the underlying substance of all things is oneness. In other words, he's saying, there is only one thing. And if there is only one thing, there is only one time, there is only one place, which means there's no place to go, because you're already there. That's why you can't step into the river, because the river is an illusion. You are an illusion. There is only one thing. And when we think we see different objects or things in the world, we get confused in our mind. And this is our next major shift in philosophy. Parmenides is a rationalist, and he is claiming we have to use reason to correct our sense perception. All the folks so far have been empiricist, and that's a $20 word to mean we gain knowledge through sense perception, through our eyes, through our nostrils, through our ears, through touch. That is how we taste. That's how we get to know the world. But the rationalists are saying, no, your senses can deceive you. That's why you have to use reason to critique and adjust your senses. And Parmenides said, based on reason, there can only be one thing. Okay? Now, that's not the way the world appears, but intellectually, we have to understand the truth of it. And he had a lot of examples to do that. Let me see if I can do one for you real quickly. So, Parmenides had a buddy called Zeno. And Zeno was a mathematician. And he used mathematical paradoxes to help support Parmenides' ideas. And so here's one of the examples. If we take something, an object like this, and we divide it in half, and then in half again, theoretically, how many times can I keep dividing this object?
Infinitely.
An infinite amount of time.
Infinite.
But do you see the problem? If I can divide this piece of paper an infinite amount of times, it means this paper is infinitely large, which would mean the entire cosmos would be filled with that piece of paper. Therefore, division is not possible. Okay, let me explain this to you in another way. I know you're looking at me on a computer screen, and I can't physically go through my screen into your room and bonk you on the head or whatever, but imagine coming up to the screen from where you are now. Well, if I could teleport through walking through my screen, first I would have to get to the halfway point between me and the screen. But in order to get to that halfway point, I'd have to get to the halfway point between me and the halfway point. But in order to get to the halfway point between the half point, I'd have to get to this point, this point, this point. Theoretically, there's an infinite amount of points between me and you. Therefore, I can never reach you because you're infinitely far away. Movement is not possible. Movement is an illusion. He's using an argument technique in philosophy called Argumentum Ad Absurdum. And it's where you take the perspective of your opponent to its logical conclusion to show them how nonsensical it is, and thereby making your proposition seem correct. Are you okay, Carlos? You're grabbing your head funny.
I'm trying to like dissect that. That's crazy. So then, I don't know. That's crazy.
It actually took people, I think, into the 18th century to figure a mathematical solution to Zeno's paradoxes. Now, we do have mathematical solutions today, but the ancient Greeks did not. And so Zeno was just messing with people's heads like crazy. I didn't have geometry until like the 7th grade, and I still remember that class because I was so traumatized. The teacher's up there doing timelines on the board, and he starts simple, and I wish I had a whiteboard, but I'll just do it virtually. I'll draw in the air for you. So he starts with a point on the board. By the way, you can't draw a point on the board. Why is that? Does anyone know how to define a point in geometry? A point has location, but it does not have any height, width, or depth. And so he puts a point on the board, he labels it 0, and then he draws a line with an arrow on the end to symbolize that line is going infinitely in that direction. And then he makes dashes. He goes 1, 2, 3, 4, to an infinite amount of numbers. And then he drew a line going the other way with an arrow on it. And he said, you can go -1, -2, -3, infinitely. It's the next thing is what broke my mind as a 7th grader. He went in between 0 and 1 on the timeline, and he said, there is also an infinite amount of numbers between 0 and 1. And my poor little prefrontal lobe attachment 7th grade mind could not handle it. And I stayed after class and argued with him for an hour that there cannot be an infinite amount of numbers. But he showed me half, quarter, eighth, 16th, 32nd, 64th, and as much as you can keep going, you can have an infinite amount of numbers between 0 and 1. Infinity can be between the fingers on your hand. There's an infinite amount of space. And this is what Zeno was using to mess with the Greeks and to support Parmenides' thesis that all is one. And it doesn't matter what you call it. He believes only one thing exists, but that one thing is physical material reality. But there's no movement, there's no change in time. All of that is the illusion. The reality is that oneness. Let me tell you the solution to the paper one while I'm at it. See, being a non-mathematician, I simply thought infinity equals infinity. But my math friend said, oh, Fred, oh, you poor little simpleton, there's different types of infinity. And I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, there's limited infinity and then there's infinite infinity. And I was like, good Lord, what's limited infinity? And he said, go back to your timeline example. If you take this piece of paper, it's simply one directional timeline. It's not the entire cosmos. It's not like arrows going both. So even though I can infinitely divide this theoretically into an infinite amount of pieces, if I put all those infinite pieces back together, it will never be bigger than this original piece of paper. Because I'm only making it smaller going one way. I'm not doubling the size going the other way. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the solution to that dilemma. There is a consistency where everything is the same, but there is also a flux where things appear to change. And so for me personally, I actually see Heraclitus and Parmenides as two sides of the same coin. One is focused on the oneness and constancy, and the other is talking about the change. But both believe in a holistic consistency, like Heraclitus's cosmic egg, and from whence everything came and will return to again. It's all still one thing. Or Parmenides seeing everything permanent and not moving, not changing, and the change we do perceive as being illusion. I think they're just focused on two sides of the same issue. There is a world of consistency that appears to be in flux. And this is kind of rounds out the monistic materialist philosophers.